We've tried to replicate what large institutions have done, and we're no longer in the population or the federal support state that can continue. And so, and I think there are gaps and pockets where students really need unique opportunities, delivery modes, and small colleges are doing that more than I think large ones are. And so that gives me a lot of hopes for our sector of higher education.
Welcome to Small College America, a podcast dedicated to exploring the role and value of small colleges in higher education. I'm Dean Hoke, co-founder of Edu Alliance, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kent Barnds, who is with Augustana College.
Thanks, Dean. It's good to see you. Joining us today is Leamor Kahanov, who serves as Provost and Senior Vice President at Alvernia University, which is a private Franciscan institution in Reading, Pennsylvania. She is a scholar, administrator, and academic strategist with more than 25 years of experience as provost, dean, and professor. Leamor has also served as provost at Stockton University and SUNY, State University of New York, Oneonta, before joining Alvernia in August of 2023. She is a scholar, and her credentials are remarkable, with more than 90 peer-reviewed publications, 120 peer-reviewed presentations, a textbook on athletic training and therapy, and she is also the co-host of EdUp Accreditation Insights, a nationally recognized podcast that has won EdTech Chronicle's Best in Education Award 2 years running. She brings a working provost lens to the complex world of accreditation, which is not easy to do. So we're grateful for that part of your work. Before her career in academic administration, she served as a certified athletic trainer, even working at the Olympic Games. She's earned her doctorate from the University of San Francisco and completed the Institute for Educational Management and Leadership at Harvard University. Welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to have you write my bio from now on. You make me sound so wonderful. I hope I live up to that bio.
Well, we're going to find out, because my first question has to do a little bit about your bio. We found out doing this series, of course, that nobody comes by way of a straight path in terms of how they come into their positions in academia and things. But I got to admit, yours is a little bit different. I mean, you've been a long time academic, you've come through the ranks, etc. But I am curious about the athletic training side of that. Help kind of connect the dots a little bit.
Sure, and I'm still trying to explain to my parents what I do. Well, I think I'm not dissimilar to a lot of academicians or individuals in general who zig and zag through life, right? If you had asked me when I was 16 what I wanted to do, I was going to work at the Olympics, and I was going to be an athletic trainer, and I was going to work for the USOC the rest of my life. And then I was working at San Francisco State University, and I'll make this quick, and they asked me to adjunct for a course because someone had left a week before the course was to start. And I said, as I do many things, sure, I'll give it a go. How bad can it be? And what I realized is I liked that more than what I was doing in the clinic. And I went back and I got my doctorate and then zigged and zagged my way to where I am today. And I often will tell young individuals who are undecided that if you had asked me even 15 years ago, would I want to be a provost, I would have said absolutely not. So keep the door open and listen to the people who tap you on the shoulder. I think I took some of these roles on not because it was a plan, but because other people saw something in me I may not have seen in myself. So that's the short piece of a long story.
Well, I want to kind of keep going down that short piece of what potentially could be a long story. And as an athletic trainer and doing, I mean, in a sense, if you're talking about being a 16-year-old and going, I'm going to do this in the Olympics, by golly, you did. I'm very curious about what you learned. And were there things that you learned in that part of your world that you used in academia as part of your overall leadership positions?
Yeah, I think so. And probably not what you think it would be.
Okay.
Or maybe not. I don't mean to cast aspersions to what you're thinking at all. But what I did take with me may not be specific to leadership, but it is specific to communication and personal agency. And that listening to what people are actually saying and what they're not saying. What I found in athletic training was that often individuals, it was more important what they weren't saying than what they were. And many times their position with me had nothing to do with me. So to find the root cause or the root impetus for what they're talking about was very important. And I find that's no different in this job. And it's no different sitting around the table, that the silence and the omissions sometimes tell more of the story than what individuals are actually saying. And also, you can't move any agenda item forward with giving individuals their own personal agency in the process. If I look at rehabilitation or getting an athlete back on the court or the field or the whatever ice, whatever it is, if they don't have their own personal agency in that, then they're not going to be successful. And I think it's the same when you're leading. If you don't include people in the process and with their perspectives and that they have to have ownership, it typically doesn't move forward. I can't say it fails, but it doesn't necessarily move forward. And I think that's what I took away from that experience.
Very good. Ken?
What a keen insight. And I really appreciate being attentive to what's not being said just as much as what is being said. So I appreciate that insight. On our podcast, we go right for we go right to be direct. So
please do.
What are people and our listeners missing about the role of the provost today, especially at institutions where academic decisions are directly tied to enrollment and financial sustainability? That's a big question.
Sure.
And especially for small colleges, it's central to our existence. So what are people missing?
Well, there is no day. It all runs together. You can get a call at 10 o'clock at night or on Sunday at 2 on things that you never thought you would have a stake in or a conversation in. And that's one of the things I love about the job, I will say, is that no day is the same. You go in with a plan and it changes almost immediately. But I think one of the things that is unique to small colleges, and all colleges are different, right? Some are more comprehensive, some are more, liberal arts focused, some have larger endowments. But it's the balance of social inquiry, teaching, engaging students, and the realities of the fiscal nature of our environment right now. And what we're here to do is to educate our students, right? If you stripped everything away, that's what we're here to do. But there's also expectations beyond that of parents, of students, of the state, of the federal government that puts pressure on us to do what is at our core. And I think that kind of balance is what keeps me up at night. How are we going to keep our faculty engaged in scholarship when I can't give them any funding this year? How are we going to make that happen? And those are the realities of the office, right? How are we going to make sure we have enough classes, but we streamline it enough to make the budget? How are we going to pay attention to the new federal oversight without creating more incursion on the financial cost to the students? Those are the pieces. That's the juggle. And also making sure as a provost that you keep the faculty understanding and transparent and democratizing information as much as possible so that they understand that none of this is about wanting anything that they don't want for themselves. It's about having to balance what is required to make institutions solvent at this point.
Appreciate that very much. How do you go about that educational and transparency process about balance? When it comes to balancing the academic mission with those very real enrollment and financial pressures, how do you ensure that your colleagues understand what you're balancing?
I think that's a great question, and I don't even know if I do it well. You would actually have to ask my faculty. I think one, you have to stay humble, and I have kids who do that for me. But I do think being in a mission-driven institution, and in particular Franciscan, actually helps. Having been at larger institutions, public institutions, often it's hard to pull everything back to the mission because individuals don't really connect with the mission always. When you have the mission as the foundational platform for discussion, we can always bring it back to the mission. How does this help our mission in teaching the vulnerable, teaching the whole student, making sure that we are relevant with what they're going to need to do the rest of their lives? If we bring it back to that every time, it's easy to have conversations. But within that, garnering trust among the faculty and the staff that you serve. Without that trust piece, it doesn't matter what you say, whether you're saying you're providing all the information, sharing in it. If they don't believe you, you can't move anything forward. And part of that goes back to what I said about what I learned as an athletic trainer, and that is we put the goal out there. Now tell me how we're going to get there. And bring people in so that they are part of the solution. We have to do this by next June. Help me get there. Tell me what we need. And then we have the dialogue and lots of report outs. I host lots of town halls, lots of provost office hours. It ends up the same 5 people end up coming, but that's okay, right? But that's all right. And I think doing what you say you're going to do.
That follow through is critical to the trust building. So
absolutely.
Thank you. That was a great answer to a big and tough question. So Dean, I'll turn it to you, which I think there's a direct connection to what we were just talking about.
Well, we're just talking about this, and I mean, there's always this conflict, particularly with an identity of a school, and particularly maybe with the Franciscans and their basic philosophy about higher education. And do you ever have that moment where the market is just pulling you in one direction big time, and the mission is pulling you in the opposite direction? And if that happens, how do you decide?
Yeah, I think what I said earlier is we always go back to the mission. That's first and foremost. And I think the sisters wouldn't be very happy if we were going in a direction that didn't align with the mission.
Yep.
But I think your question is poignant in that we have a lot of push and pull, not just the market. We have push and pull with federal decrees and guidelines and oversight. How do we manage? Let's just take DEI.
Yep.
The Franciscans serve all, right? So does what the federal government say about DEI address the Franciscan sisters' charisms at their core? And how do we navigate and negotiate that? Because they're a religious entity and this is what they're wed to, and the two are in conflict. And so I think we continue to say we serve all people. And we continue to do those kind of things. I think that is something that we're finding more than the market. One of the things I think, I'm guessing we would probably get to this later, is that when you are a small institution and you don't have a large endowment and you are tuition driven, you have to be incredibly flexible with the programs that you create and the programs that you close. And unless they are tried and true programs like business, like psychology, the ones that everybody has, that the majority of students are in, right, you have to be incredibly flexible to meet the market needs. If you are regional, you have to pay attention. If you are national, you have to pay attention to those. And you have to be incredibly flexible. As long as it meets the mission of the institution, there aren't many programs that we would say don't meet those metrics.
I want to go down a little bit of a different path just for a second. And
sure,
because you've brought up faculty on a number of cases, I don't know the faculty at your school. Tell me about have they been at your institution? Do they have a kind of what their lifespan? I mean, are these 1, 2, or 3 year people and then they just rotate and head out to other places? Are they long-term faculty? I'm curious a little bit about the personality of your faculty.
I have to say, having been a 3-time provost and a previous dean, they are really a joy to work with. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on a podcast. I'm saying that because I truly believe it. And that isn't that, you have to love the arc of faculty and what they bring to the table and the way that they think. And it's not like any other entity, right? The faculty that we have stay for a long time because they buy into the mission and that's why they're here. It is not for the salary. We pay a salary that's equitable, but it's certainly if you wanted to make a lot of money, you would not be coming to a small regional mission driven institution. And so what that does, I think in many ways, is there's a long institutional history, and they are wed to the Franciscan values, and it creates a nice pathway for new faculty to understand the culture. What it does in the provost office, and I know everyone who's in administration has heard this, is there is a lot of, we tried that. We've done that. That's not how we do things here. But I do think, and I'm hoping that other faculty are in this place too, they have woken up to the realities of small college or university and the ecosystem we're in right now. They're seeing their friends at institutions that are closing. We are getting students from institutions that have closed, and we're hearing that in the classroom. So they have woken up to that and are willing to be part of the conversation about what that means at our institution and how do we move forward. And so it's kind of like COVID, right? Nobody wanted to go online, and then you went online, and now everyone talks about being online, right? And teaching online. And I think that kind of dramatic culture and the things that are happening in higher ed has really made people open their eyes and say, what can we do to not be in that bucket?
Got it. Ken?
You co-host EdUp Accreditation Insights, which puts you at a really interesting intersection, institutional quality, federal policy, at a fascinating moment, given the talk at the federal level, or at least maybe in the executive branch, about accreditation. Accreditation is under significant political pressure right now. We would love to know, and our listeners would love to know from your seat as both a sitting provost and a podcast host, what maybe gives you hope about the conversation surrounding accreditation and reaccreditation right now, and what makes you a little uneasy?
I'll start with hope. I like that better. I have been blessed with being able to be a co-host, because what I have learned is there are some amazing thought leaders in smaller institutions that really can highlight the flexibility and innovation needed right now in our sector in order to be sustainable. And I think some of those things are happening in smaller colleges more than they are in the publics that they're so large and have to move so slowly that if we really pay attention, there are some really innovative and smart individuals changing their small colleges to make them functional within the place where they are. And I'm just thinking, there's things in Maine, there's things in, Wisconsin and Michigan and some of these smaller schools, and they're not the ones that we hear are closing without identifying them specifically. They're the ones that are learning how to pivot and learning how to flex. That gives me a lot of hope, because I do think that the model that we have used is not going to work for small colleges anymore. We've tried to replicate what large institutions have done, and we're no longer in the population or the federal support state that can continue. And so, and I think there are gaps and pockets where students really need unique opportunities, delivery modes, and small colleges are doing that more than I think large ones are. And so that gives me a lot of hope for our sector of higher education. What does concern me, though, are the places that think that if we continue as business as usual, there will be a boomerang effect. And there will be a moment, if we can just last the next 5 years, where it will look like it did before.
Mm.
And I don't think that is helpful with the external environment, what parents, what the media is saying. And they miss the mark, if I may. We talk about the cost of higher education, and that's true. Education is a bit more expensive, but not really when you look at the cost of living increases that have happened over the 30 years. But what has occurred is federal overlay. Every single time we have a new, now you have to talk about workforce development and you have to turn in all that. We need to hire somebody to do that.
Yeah.
Mental health was a big issue. Well, now we have to hire 5 or 6 or 7 more people to address mental health issues, which I'm not talking about in any pejorative sense. It's just the reality, right? We have to, financial aid over the past 10 years has gotten more laborious. We have to hire more people. Of course, the costs are going up because the overlay that we are expected to deliver requires more people to do that. And that's the piece that worries me, is the expectations for delivery and what we offer is not matching the expectations for cost. And they can't coexist for too much longer.
Well,
that was a major diatribe, so my apologies.
No, that was pretty good.
It was a really thoughtful answer, and I especially given our audience appreciate the emphasis on the fact that small colleges are doing really innovative work, and maybe some of this pressure on accrediting agencies to think a little bit differently about the accreditation process, and it's not a one size fits all model, is relevant and important for today. So it was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could redirect, I think having hosted this podcast now this is our 3rd year, the accrediting agencies are willing to work with institutions, and they are not looking for a one size fits all. They are looking for the delivery and how you say you deliver it to align with what you say to the students. So all of the accrediting bodies we've talked to seem to have that mindset. I think we just don't know what the new ones are that will be created, what those will look like.
Well, let's talk as we continue this, and we've been talking about accreditation, but I'd like to go back a little bit to academic curriculum and majors and things. And as you know, it was for a number of years fairly stagnant in terms of new programs being developed because, it was working just fine. But that world seems to have changed. And I'm curious about a traditional liberal arts college. How are you looking at curriculum majors? Are you cutting back? Are you redirecting? Are you doing new programs? And I'm
Sure.
curious about that process and how you get there.
I think it's a yes and.
Okay.
I mean, my perspective may not align with others, but I really think as we move forward, I think there's 2 pieces to this. As we move forward into more of a digital age with AI and other advances, we don't really know what that's going to look like. But what we do know is that we're going to have people who have the human side of our environment. We also are going to have individuals that can catch silent mistakes, who can identify when AI hallucinates and has a background to understand. They may not understand, this goes back to that book, Blink. They may not be able to catch exactly what's happening, but they know it doesn't look right. And if we aren't educating people on a liberal underpinning across disciplines to be able to do that, I think that is going to be to our detriment as humans. So if you're asking me about liberal arts institution, I think they're critical. But I also don't think that they are going to be able to stand alone. They are going to need the and piece. The and piece for me, and like I said, there are some tried and true majors that have been the same since 1950 or 60. Business, psychology, engineering, they've been the top 80% of all majors forever. But I think we might need to think about majors differently than we have been. For example, who would have thought that we needed a data analytics 10 years ago? But it's also going out of favor because of AI. So we need to be more flexible. Maybe we're going to have majors that have a 5 to 10 year run because we don't know what's on the other side of some of those. I'm looking at data management for some of those large data centers, right? We're going to need some individuals who know how to manage those centers. But at a certain point, we've taught up the majority of them, and you're not going to need all those programs. They're going to have to end. RN to BSN is another one. We had lots of RNs that wanted to become bachelor's nurses, and now we've taught most of those. So a lot of those programs are going away. And I think we need to learn to be more flexible. And I think our boards are going to have to understand that we're like a business. We need to be more flexible in that way Still understanding that the liberal arts underpinnings and those tried and true majors will stay there. But we may have some that come and go with time. And we have to be okay with that.
And with that, you brought up an interesting point. We always talk about it in terms of administration. We generally talk among ourselves. We're talking about the president and the provost and the deans and everybody, and they're having these conversations. But I think every once in a while, at least some of us may have a tendency to forget, well, the person is going to make a final call on this. It's going to be the board of trustees on a lot of these things. And how you communicate to them and try to give them the facts, because most of them are not academics. I mean, they're from businesses or they're from other things. Do you feel that your school and maybe others are doing a good job at communicating in terms of communicating with their trustees on these kind of things?
Yeah, and it's a fine line. So I'm also on the board of another institution, and I can't speak for all institutions, but I do think that most institutions do their best to educate their board as to what their responsibilities are, what their fiscal responsibilities, their responsibilities to the president, and what that fine line is without putting their fingers in the cookie jar and getting into operations. And that is a fine line because we have to educate on, why is it we're starting a major that we think is only going to be worth, 7 to 10 years? Those kind of educational pieces because they're heavily tied to finance. And those conversations need to happen routinely and often. And we need to inculcate the new board members into that kind of thought process. And that's work. And that's work for the president. And that's work for whoever is the board liaison to work on that continued education with the board. Without that kind of constant conversation, someone is blamed. And that person leaves. And I'm concerned about the shorter and shorter tenures of provosts and presidents, I being one of them. I mean, look at my vita. It's all predicated on presidents leaving, right? Short tenures. How do we move agenda items forward in the best interest of the institution and the community if the average president leaves after 3 years? If the average provost leaves after 2.3? And what kind of culture that creates with faculty who may not be as wonderful as mine, who just think we'll just wait this person out. That doesn't help the institution. So I think there needs to be a better commitment with the boards. And part of that is a better education of what is happening and what that means.
Got it. Well, I'm afraid we're coming very close to running out of time, but Kent, you have the last question.
I do, and I just want to say I appreciate your fresh thinking on so much, and our final question is sort of thinking about the future, but the fresh thinking of sunsetting programs as smart, responsible business decisions. That's fresh, that's new, and I appreciate it. Let's turn to your crystal ball. Let's see how you do in predicting the future. We could be talking about the demographic cliff, political pressure on accreditation, artificial intelligence, the growing skepticism about the value of the degree. How do you see the future of academic leadership unfolding given all of these pressures?
Well, I think my crystal ball broke in COVID. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have one that actually works or a magic wand. I guess I will say I think that there is a space here where small colleges can be the thought leaders. And I think I said that earlier on how to navigate through the chaos that is happening right now. And I think we do need to wait out a little bit some of this chaos that is happening around us because individuals always like to retrench when there's chaos because it makes people comfortable. And so I do think there is positivity on the other end. Everybody's still going to school for something, right? And so the value hasn't decreased. The rhetoric has increased. So I think there's some positivity there. And I think we really have a space to shine. Our voice may be smaller, but it's only going to take a few more of our small colleges and the innovation that I see across them for that to catch on and for the media to hear that and for administration and states to hear that. I think these kind of podcasts are really helpful to highlight that.
Well, thank you very much. And I love the idea of small colleges being the innovators and the places that really can make a difference as we move forward. So, Dean, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time and we need to go ahead and complete our interview. And I want to thank you very much for this conversation. This has been refreshing. I mean, it's been a great conversation to get into, particularly with academic leadership and where things are now and where they're heading in the future. And I very much appreciate your candor and particularly your scholarship and the overall work you do. So thank you very much for that.
You've been very kind. I appreciated chatting with both of you and letting me speak. Thank you for the time. It's been wonderful.
Well, you've been quite welcome. And now I have to do the bread and butter stuff here. So if those listening or viewing, if you'd like to learn more about Small College America, go to our webpage at www.smallcollegeamerica.net, where you can find details on upcoming episodes, contact us, suggest topics you'd like us to cover. I also encourage you to subscribe to our series on your favorite podcast network. This episode of Small College America is made possible from the underwriting support of Edu Alliance Group, a higher education consulting firm that champions small colleges and communities that they serve. Also, since we have a fellow podcaster here, I'd also like to remind people that if your college or your university is involved in podcasting, make sure to check out something called HigherEdPodCon. That's coming to Cleveland, Ohio on July 16th and 17th. It's a wonderful opportunity for professional development and networking and others doing this great work in higher education. If you want to find out more about it, go to www.higheredpodcon.com. Not easy to say, but I can do it one time for details. So on behalf of our guest, my co-host, and myself, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.